I want to again thank our staff at MITI, MIT Energy Initiative, who are continuing to work tirelessly to help us pull this off, and the Department of Energy staff who are helping keep us on track, which is why I'm up here now and why I'm going to speak very quickly, because our panel is supposed to be coming on just about now. I hope everybody had a great dinner last night. We're going to start off the day with a panel about the future grid. And we've got some amazing people. As I talked about the chemistry of all the people that we brought together, I mentioned Ann Berwick yesterday. I just want to also mention that, speaking of the chemistry, I talked about Don Sadoway and how he had started this company, Ambry, and later that morning, Kristen Brief, who is a high executive, obviously female at that company, said hi to me. So she's here today, and I'm just so happy that we have, people like Kristen involved with C3E. She's the VP of Corporate Development and Treasurer. So anyway, Catherine Hamilton is going to be our moderator, back to the Future Grid panel. Catherine is a founder and principal of 38 North Solutions. It's a public policy firm. She's based in DC, and she has an extensive renewables and grid background. She was president of the GridWise Alliance and advocated for nearly $5 billion in funding for smart grid projects in the Recovery Act. And prior to that, she was a policy advisor for Good Energies, co-directed the American Bioenergy Association, and led buildings research and managed government relations for NREL. Finally, she's part of the Energy Gang podcast through Green Tech Media. So thank you, Catherine.
Thanks, you guys, so much. One of the speakers, Ann Berwick, said, all right, rather than reading all of our bios, why don't we just get up each time we speak and we're going to say the bio that we want to have rather than the bio that's in the materials. So you guys can read the bios in the materials, that's awesome, but they're going to tell you the bio that they want you to hear. And so with that in mind, I'm going to do a little bit of that. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited to be an ambassador. This is my first year at it, my first year at the symposium, and it's an amazing event. I wanted to just say a couple of things about, there was my bio, but if you didn't hear that, I would just say I majored in creative writing, and I got a master's in French, and I wanted to write and illustrate children's books. So the first job I could find was as an engineer for a power company. And I took night classes in alternating current, and I took a test every 6 months to make sure that I knew everything. And honestly, the engineers are going to kill me. It was kind of like reading a cookbook. Like, if you could do the formula, it was all okay. And so I was doing blueprints and designing transformers and switches and French drains and, ooh la la, I knew French. And I was doing all these very technical things and finding that I loved it and that it was okay and I could do it. And it wasn't all that tough. And so, part of what I want to say is I've basically tried to work for money all of my life. Even work, study in college. I worked dish machine, which wasn't super awesomely fun, but we made it fun. Everything I've done, I've always really enjoyed. I've liked every job I've had. That doesn't mean I haven't had some awful experiences, like when my manager took us all into a staff meeting when I was pregnant with my first kid, and said, I hope that motherhood doesn't prevent us from making our goals this year. Things like that. This happens to everybody, especially those of us who've been around for a while. And the only time I wasn't working for pay was when my fourth child was born, the second with Down syndrome, and I ended up taking off a couple of years to try to get all the heart surgeries and all that stuff done. And I was miserable because I wasn't out there interacting with people and working. And I said to my husband, I'm never going to speak in 3-syllable words again. This is awful. I need to get out there. And he said, well, I said, I know I'm doing the right thing. That's all. And he said, well, maybe you should try to find something good every day. Just one thing, one moment of goodness. And I took that and sort of thought, well, what if this is it, right? This is your only life. You don't get do-overs, right? So this is it. But what if this is actually also heaven? What if this is going to be everything? And so I decided, why don't every single day I try to find that slice of heaven, just that tiny little piece that I can say, that's my moment of heaven. And that really took me through those 2.5, almost 3 years before I was approached by Good Energies to work for them. And I met Rashinda, that's another story, but she was awesome, and I wish she were here. And just tried to always find something good. And I was thinking about this last night, and I was like, how on earth can I ever decide what my slice of heaven is here? This whole thing is heaven. Like, there's not just one moment here, it's the entire thing. So thank you all for being that entire heaven thing for me. And I would just say, kind of in closing out, that some of the things that I've learned through the course of my life, and most of this is stuff you learn in kindergarten, really, is to go for it. Just like, if something comes up, just do it. And I've never really thought much about the consequences. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. I just sort of said, I could be an engineer. Like, why not, right? I can figure this thing out. Or, I can start my own company. Sure, I've got 4 kids I have to support, but I'm sure this will all work out. So I'm going to work really hard. And, just go for it. Trust your instincts. Trust what you know, and don't undersell yourself, because you're like a lot more powerful than you're willing to tell yourself that you are. I'll guarantee that. For the Energy Gang, I'm absolutely certain that I study and prepare far more than the other people on the Energy Gang do, because I'm obsessed about not messing up. But so, don't sell yourself short. Be nice and help everybody. And all of you all are so wonderful and helpful and nice. And I think that is really huge. And also, try to find your slice of heaven every day. Feel something wonderful about it. And just so that you'll know that I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be provocative here, but when I was packing, I have 4 kids, and I was leaving in the dark on Monday morning to come up, and I forgot like a lot of my clothing. So, I don't know if you can read the MIT. Anyway, I went to the Coop and got myself an MIT t-shirt. So, somebody said I should just go Beyonce, but that would not have been your slice of heaven, let me tell you. That would have been nobody's. So anyway, I want to now tell you that we have the most amazing panel. I am just here to say what she says every time they say something. And I'm going to list who they are and what their titles are, but then they're going to each come up and talk to you about who they are, what their resume is that they want you to know, and then a little bit about this topic, which is really important. So Ann Berwick is the chair of the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities. Caroline Choi is the Vice President of Integrated Planning and Environmental Affairs for Southern California Edison, and she took the red eye and looks awesome, and she obviously didn't forget any of her clothes. And Alison Silverstein is the President of the Board of the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, and she's done absolutely everything in the world, and you can read about that. So, Ann, you're first. Why don't you all go up? Women manage logistics better than men. Well, obviously, what they say.
I totally love that intro, and I can't do better than that. And I completely endorse the go for it message. Just be nice and go for it. I think that's a great message. So my conventional bio says the usual. But here's the one I want to tell you. I moved from being a legal services lawyer in Seattle to being a litigator at the Boston law firm of Goulston and Storrs, to heading the Environmental Protection Division of the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. And basically, I wended my way towards that environmental position more because of my enthusiasm for mountains and hiking than because of any expertise, at least at that point, in environmental law. And after the Mass AG's office, I worked for the Natural Resources Division of the Alaska Attorney General's office for a year, mostly because of the enthusiasm I've already mentioned. And thanks to my family's gracious willingness to take on that adventure. After that, I worked for a small consulting firm with a focus on energy and environment, and then joined the Patrick administration in Massachusetts, first as Undersecretary for Energy, and then as DPU chair. My husband and I have 4 grown children, 4 seems to be a theme, and 3 small grandsons. And by the way, I took off 7 years between legal services and joining a law firm, which is when I had 3 of my 4 children. So I say that to this group in particular to mention my view that you can drop out and get back in. I'm going to address our panel's topic of a green and decentralized grid by talking about the following topics. First, that we need to stop being against every possible way of keeping the lights on. Second, that we need to use more, not less, electricity. Third, that offshore wind, even more than decentralized supply, is our largest clean energy resource. And fourth, that nuclear energy and natural gas will not get us out of the soup we're in for different reasons. So first, we need to stop being against everything. We're against offshore wind because it's expensive and because we like pristine ocean views. One of my favorite contacts from Massachusetts resident, by the way, was when the DPU had before us the contract between Cape Wind and National Grid, and I got an email. I got a number of emails. I got an email from someone saying, let's not put this wind farm in such a pristine area. Why don't we put it on the top of Mount Washington where it's out of the way? I gather, not knowing of my affinity for mountains. So we're against nuclear power because of nuclear waste and the risk to public safety. We're against natural gas because it's a fossil fuel. But we can't be against all generating resources and keep the lights on. Mature public policy requires us to face reality and accept the least bad options. There are no great ones other than energy efficiency. Second, we need to use more, not less, electricity. And yes, I intended to say that. We need to decarbonize the electric grid and electrify the heating of buildings and transportation. If we have a prayer of addressing climate change given current technology, we have to decarbonize, that is, clean the electric grid, and use electricity for heating and transportation instead of the more polluting fuels we now use for those purposes. But please understand, by saying we should use more rather than less electricity, I don't mean at all to detract from the role of conservation and energy efficiency. It's our first fuel and our cheapest fuel. And when you look at this slide, you can get a sense of how much more energy efficiency we could still capture in this country. So that's pretty amazing, huh? I mean, it's not as if France and Germany have fantastically balmy climates. Ireland and UK also. Third, offshore wind. This was my third point. Offshore wind, even more than decentralized supply, is our largest clean energy resource. So let me first define that decentralized, by which we typically mean small-scale resources. Although we have other small, clean, decentralized, distributed resources. In Massachusetts, decentralized refers overwhelmingly to solar. So let's talk about solar. And remember, this is in the context of the view that offshore wind is really the resource that gives us hope that we can address climate change. It's the best hope for cleaning the grid and then moving our other energy uses to electricity. So first, let's talk about solar, which in Massachusetts is really what we mean by a decentralized resource. So Massachusetts has gone in 7 years from 4 megawatts of solar energy to over 500 megawatts, with a solar goal set by Governor Patrick of 1,600 megawatts in 2020. So have a look at this slide. That's what it says in my notes, but how I get there, do I just, where's the person who's?
That was what I would have done.
Yeah. How do I do that?
So you can just press this.
Aha.
Is that what you wanted?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, okay. So this tells you something about, thank you. So this tells us about solar development in Massachusetts. And those yellow dots are solar installations. 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. And I imagine by the time we get to 2015, we just color it yellow. So even taken together, and that's 500 megawatts. Or actually, it's less than 500 megawatts. It's 460 something because it's 2013. So even taken together, the other 5 New England states don't match Massachusetts. And for context, New England's peak energy use is about 28,000 megawatts. So we're at about 500 megawatts out of 28,000 megawatts. And as solar prices continue to fall, solar will continue to expand. So I really do anticipate that within a couple of years, we can just paint that yellow. But my point is that solar provides only a small fraction of our electricity, notwithstanding the Patrick administration's remarkable progress. And just to be clear, I'm a big solar proponent. I have solar panels on my house. My son works for a solar developer. Also, Massachusetts is not inhospitable to solar from a climate perspective. Germany, not known for a Mediterranean climate, supplies 7% of its electricity from solar, which way exceeds the US. So what about green resources to power the New England grid other than small-scale decentralized resources? What about the larger resources? Apart from offshore wind, which is going to be my punchline, New England has significant amounts of large-scale onshore, not offshore, wind and hydro. But the large amounts of onshore wind and hydro are in northern New England and have serious transmission barriers. And in Massachusetts, just down here in Massachusetts, we currently have less than 200 megawatts of onshore wind. Remember, I talked about 500 megawatts currently of solar, 200 megawatts of onshore wind, and large quantities of onshore wind in Massachusetts are unlikely given our population density. So remember, in terms of solar and wind, we now have 500 megawatts of solar, 200 megawatts of wind in Massachusetts, a whole bunch more in the north, but with transmission barriers in the context of 28,000 megawatts at peak. Canadian hydro, by contrast, is a huge resource, but it has the same transmission barriers as hydro and wind in northern New England. Also, a topic that no one discusses very much is that Quebec, which is where the largest hydro resource is a winter peaking system. And winter is when New England is the most stressed, not just psychologically, but also from an energy perspective, because that's when we use natural gas both for heating and for electric generation. So getting finally to my point, my third point, that offshore wind is our largest clean energy resource by far. So remember the numbers I gave you, 200 megawatts, 500 megawatts in the context of a 28,000 megawatt peak. The Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory concluded in a 2010 study that the US has a technical offshore wind potential of 4 million megawatts or 4,000 gigawatts. That's 4 times the country's total electric generating capacity from all sources. These numbers are technical potential, which is admittedly very far from existing or even planned development, and includes all of the coastal US and the Great Lakes. But New England has an impressive chunk of that capacity right off our own coast, close to some of the country's biggest electric load. In fact, the National Renewable Energy Lab issued an analysis earlier this year that estimates that 5 gigawatts could be developed in the mass wind energy area designated by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and could be auctioned this year. A smaller area off Rhode Island and Massachusetts coast has already been auctioned to deep water wind, which plans to develop a 1.2 gigawatt project. Including the 468 megawatts that Cape Wind is expected to begin building in early 2015, this adds up to 6,668 megawatts. And that's for Massachusetts and Rhode Island only, while virtually every state along the East Coast is working to stand up this new industry. I'm obviously not arguing that offshore wind is easy to site or can be built quickly, although hopefully after Cape Wind's ordeal, other resources will not have the saga that Cape Wind has had. But like other renewable resources, it comes with challenges. However, for siting, we aren't dependent on other states as we are for Canadian hydro and Northern New England onshore wind and hydro, right? Those resources have to get to us through the Northern New England states. If you follow the Northern Pass adventure in New Hampshire, you know that getting these resources to us is not a simple matter. And it is expensive. There's no getting away from that, although I would argue that it is nowhere near as expensive as the failure to address climate change. But the main point I want to make here is that for the Atlantic coast states, offshore wind is both scalable and accessible. And at least for now, other renewable resources do not have that combination of characteristics. Fourth, nuclear energy and natural gas will not get us out of the super in for different reasons. Nuclear power is bad. Climate change is worse. But history clearly tells us that we can't build new nuclear plants quickly enough to address the climate challenge, even forgetting political feasibility. And why am I not talking about natural gas as our savior? Don't be fooled by all the talk of natural gas as a clean fuel. We've been lulled into thinking that natural gas is clean because its combustion has half the carbon dioxide of coal, has somewhat less carbon dioxide than oil and gasoline, and because it doesn't have some of the other nasty pollutants that other fossil fuels have. But the methane that escapes during extraction, transmission, and distribution has not been accurately quantified. And methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And there are other issues like fracking. The availability of natural gas should be thought of only as supplying a window of opportunity, a brief window of opportunity, to focus on the development of renewables and storage. The real danger to be avoided is that relatively inexpensive natural gas will undermine the development of renewables rather than simply providing that window. So, in summary, we should work on developing all the clean resources that are available, solar, onshore wind, hydro, among others. But I don't believe we have a real chance of addressing the huge climate challenge without offshore wind. Thanks very much.
Good morning. I'm going to shut this. Is that okay? Well, I'm really happy to be here this morning, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I was here a couple years ago, and it's great to be back in New England. Coming from California, we don't have a lot of seasonal changes. I was hoping to feel a little bit more fall in the air, but actually on the trees I like to see a little bit more. But it was great to land this morning and feel some coolness because it's been super hot in Southern California the last few days. So. California, I'm happy to talk a little bit about California, what we're doing out there. Sometimes what we do leads to changes elsewhere in the country eventually, although a lot of people also, especially in my industry, I get a lot of comments from my colleagues about crazy California and fringe California, but we are doing a lot in California to promote clean energy, and it's primarily due to the fact that our policymakers and leaders in the state and the utilities, too, are really interested in trying to address global climate change. We have a governor who signed an executive order seeking to put California at the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. And we have a law in place to get to 1990 levels by 2020. So we are aggressively pursuing that along with a 33% renewable portfolio standard. So 33% of our electricity sales by 2020 must come from renewable resources like solar, wind, and geothermal. We have the cap and trade program to meet the 1990 emissions level by 2020. We have aggressive energy efficiency savings goals. We have the California Solar Initiative, which is an incentive for people to install solar on their homes and roofs. And then we have recently, last year I think it was, a mandate for the 3 investor-owned utilities, including Southern California Edison, to procure energy storage. So 1,350 megawatts, I think, and our share of that is 580 megawatts, also by 2020. So the state is aggressively pursuing and has a path through 2020, and now is looking at what is the path post-2020. ARB, our Clean Air Resources Board, is developing its scoping plan for 2030, and that will set really the path forward for what we do post-2020 through 2030. And so the utilities really are charged with helping to bring about that clean energy future, and without undermining our core mission of delivering safe, reliable, and affordable electricity to our customers. We think that we have a key role in designing and building and operating that grid of the future. 5 things that we're really focused on are providing the backbone distribution system, that creating that plug-and-play system that allows for 2-way power flows. So you can think about switching from sort of 1-way streets to 2-way streets. Facilitating integration of distributed energy resources. As Ann said, in California is very similar to Massachusetts. Right now, distributed energy resources primarily are solar, but we're hoping to accommodate additional technologies as they come along. Ensuring grid reliability and power quality, that's particularly important for our business customers as they become more high-tech. Any blip on the system has a real impact on their operations, and so power quality and reliability are essential for them. And then supporting continued growth and investment, not just in our industry, but also in our state. And we think that really is the future, and the distributed generation can really be a key part of that. And certainly California feels that way. So what many people, I think, don't realize is that customers with distributed generation rely on the grid as much, if not more, than our customers that don't have distributed generation. You can think about certainly our solar customers at night. Everyone is relying on that grid, and that's why the backbone is so critical. We believe that that distribution system then not only has to handle the 2-way power flows, but also needs to be smarter to integrate those technologies, not just solar, but smart appliances, smart meters. We've completed the installation of our smart meters across our system. So we've installed about 5 million of those meters. Smart inverters, and then plug-in electric vehicles. So we have, I think in our service territory, about 14% of national sales of electric vehicles are in our service territory. And California has really been leading the charge towards transportation electrification, again, primarily to try and address global climate change. And certainly the distribution system has to be hardened to withstand storms and cyber. So as we think about what we're going to be doing, the next generation grid has to involve substation automation, energy storage, the intelligent monitoring and control devices, fiber and high-speed wireless communications, and then advanced control systems that can interact with all those devices. We also believe that location of those distributed energy resources is really critical. The governor announced a goal around 2012 of 12,500 megawatts of distributed energy resources by 2025, I think. So we did a study that looked at sort of our share of that 12,500 megawatts, which is about 4,800 megawatts. And the difference between unguided, so just put that out there wherever people want to have it, or guided, is double the cost. That an unguided, if you put that 4,800 megawatts across the system willy-nilly, the cost is around $4.5 billion. If it's guided, where it's focused in on more urban circuits, where it can really help to avoid infrastructure investment, the cost drops to about $2.1 billion. Still significant, but orders of magnitude difference if you don't sort of direct where those resources are installed, and primarily because we have both a very urban and rural system, and those rural circuits are less able to handle some of these technologies because they just weren't built for that. So we really need to revise, we think, the interconnection rules around and bring some order to how those technologies are connected into the grid. And that includes things like a smart inverter standard so that we can prevent islanding, voltage variations, and loss of power quality, that sort of thing. Again, also, we believe that for the foreseeable future, and mention this, that the bulk electric system will still be the backbone. So we still see large-scale, utility-scale generation being needed. It also helps to meet the public policy goals because it can bring some of the larger-scale renewables that we're seeing developed in the eastern side of our system into the urban center. And we are investing significant dollars in our grid, about $4 billion a year right now, which is significant growth for our system. We also think that the integrated grid will require some regulatory flexibility and changes in our rate structures. The technology is developing so quickly right now. We see it particularly in California, and the regulatory environment is not one that moves as quickly as technology is developed. So we really see the need going forward for more flexibility in the regulatory structure so that it can accommodate new technologies without having to go through a 2-year filing every time these technologies come along. Current regulations also limit right now how we can participate in the market. We see a lot of new entrants into the market, and we would also like to participate, whether it's as Southern California Edison or from our parent company and through an affiliate. And then the other thing that we are seeing, particularly in California, is how rates are designed. The current rate structure in California was designed actually by our legislature during the energy crisis when we had significant brownouts occurring as a result of a lot of things. We won't get into that. So, but the legislature last year returned the rate-making authority back to the Utilities Commission and authorized the opportunity to change the current rate structure for our residential customers, which is currently a 4-tier rate structure, to a more simplified structure. It also allows the commission to implement a fixed charge for customers. This, again, is to try to address the costs associated with the system. Right now, our customers who install solar, our rate structure is volumetric rate design. And so for customers who install solar, they're not paying as much, but yet the grid is still there to serve them, and they're not really paying anything for those grid services. And then it's also, the commission will be designing new net energy metering rules that will go into effect in 2017. So the current program, they have grandfathered any customer that comes into the system prior to June of 2017 when the new program goes into effect will be grandfathered for 20 years. So the current program will apply to them for 20 years. So I think what we think is that it's clear that the way that power is generated, transmitted, and distributed is changing. And we have our strategy around that grid system. We believe a wires company is our future, and we're investing significant dollars in doing those two things simultaneously, both investing in the grid while keeping the electric system affordable and reliable. So I forgot to do my alt bio, and so let me just do that real quickly. I am actually one of 4 kids, so just maintaining the theme of 4. I grew up in the East in North Carolina in a very small town. We were actually the only Asian family in that town, so everyone knew who I was. And, oh, you must be Dr. Choi's daughter. Well, yes. Not the visiting cousin. So I went to school just up the road in New Hampshire, and then I was in Washington, D.C. right after college, and so working on the Hill in energy and environmental policy, and it's really there that I came to really love this area of work, because really the environment and energy are inextricably linked, and you see that, I think, I'm sure, in the work that you do and the studies that you do. And so for me, it's a real passion, because I really do like the idea of a cleaner environment. I think it's important to address global climate change. Growing up in Western North Carolina, my family did a lot of hiking and camping and fishing, and so it's those things that are important to me. I continue to do those things even today. I'm a big snowboarder and downhill mountain biker, and so for me, I think as we look at energy and trying to make it cleaner so that we can continue to enjoy those things going forward, and it's really important to me. So that's my alt bio. Thank you.
We don't want Anne to be penless. I'm Alison Silverstein. Hello. Okay, bio first. I actually took the unconventional bio challenge seriously. My husband and I have recently redone our wills and estate plans, so I'm going to tell you if the New York Times were going to do my obituary tomorrow, here's what I'd like it to say. And you know they're totally random in sort of who it is they decide is worthy of a detailed description. And so there's always a chance they could be so random they would choose me. And Noreen is here from Bloomberg, so we have at least one journalist in the room to document this. I think it would start with Alison's greatest professional accomplishments were she led the U.S.-Canada 2003 blackout investigation and wrote the blackout report, which actually I think matters because it is probably the only intelligible investigation report that people actually understood and never questioned in terms of its credibility and comprehensibility. When we investigated that, we just beat the crap out of it. There was absolutely no way anybody could have concluded or challenged our conclusions with respect to what happened in that. And I am very proud of that report. I guess you figured that out. I blackmailed the industry, the electric industry, into adopting cybersecurity standards in 2002, 2003. You're welcome. They're not as good as they should be, but they're way better than what they would be had we not done that. I helped set up the Texas wholesale and retail electric markets, energy efficiency portfolio standard, and renewables portfolio standard. And if you've been watching the development of wind, you know that turned out okay. Also the development of retail competitive markets, we did a pretty good job on that one too. I helped to design and implement the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative. I've been a pioneer in conceptualizing and implementing distributed generation, demand response, interoperability, smart grid. And I'll get back to that in a minute. And my greatest personal accomplishments, I'm still with my starter husband. He, of course, loves it when I call him that. We have two terrific sons who are both good people and good engineers. I can bench press 100 pounds, and I'm not done trying. I have helped to protect the health and lives of thousands of Texas musicians through the Health Alliance for Austin Musicians. And I've attended thousands of live music performances. This year, the best I've seen were Crosby, Stills and Nash, Nickel Creek, Tenarawen, and Melford Milligan. And I'm not done, because Austin City Limits Festival is in 2 weeks. So those are the personal accomplishments. As your closing speaker, we were given a couple things to talk about. Bless you. And part of my job as cleanup was to figure out what other people didn't talk about and talk about that. So I'm going to offer a few thoughts. One of them is I want to talk about my job and role. I need to back up in case you haven't read the bio, which God knows I forgive you, I wouldn't read it either. I started work 1,000,000 years ago as a minor, the lowest of bureaucrats at the Department of Interior, but I had a really cool office and it was with furniture built by convicts, 100 years ago, so it was this really big, impressive desk. And if I leaned really far back like this, I could look down Constitution Avenue and see the Washington Memorial. I had to lean the other direction to see the Lincoln Memorial. So that was a pretty good deal, that to the Department of Interior. I then had a steadily downward path as a consultant and went to Stanford Business School, and then started at Pacific Gas and Electric for 10 years, moved to Texas because a semiconductor company there made my husband an offer we couldn't refuse. answered an ad in the classifieds. I don't know how many of you remember classified ads in newspapers, but I was one of 300 applicants for a position with a brand new commissioner at the Texas Public Utility Commission under Governor George Bush, whom I still think of as a governor because he was way better as a governor. And so I ended up becoming the brand new advisor to a brand new commissioner named Pat Wood. He turned out okay too. He ended up, we were at the Texas Public Utility Commission. He was chairman became chairman a week after I joined his staff. And we spent 6 years doing Texas retail and electric competition and phone competition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Set up wholesale and retail markets. Governor Bush became President Bush. He offered my guy a job in Washington. We went to FERC, and I spent 3 years there as advisor to the chairman and de facto chief of staff, and did, blackouts and cyber, watched the Pentagon burn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And after 3 years, resisted the temptation to stay longer, avoided all of the people who want to suck up and tell you how fabulous you are, and moved back home to Texas so my kids could start high school. And threw up my shingle as an independent consultant because this is the part that I want to lecture you about. You need to know what it is you're good at, and you need to know what it is you're not good at, and you need to define success for you and your goals in terms of what works for you and your capabilities. And as I told some of you last night, not everybody's cut out to be on a board. Not everybody should be a CEO. God knows I'm not the person who should be the CEO. I don't have the stamina or the tolerance to be nice to people who my hat's off to those of you who can be. But, I just don't have it in me to pretend I really care about all of other people's issues all the time. And so my guy, when I worked with Pat for 9 years, he had desperate need to be nice. And he wanted everybody to love him, and I'm okay with you not loving me. You should respect me. You might want to be scared of me, but God knows you don't need to love me. Like is okay. But so Pat would be Mr. Everybody love me, and I would be the guy who stands behind him and feeds him the ideas and looks mean. Because if you mess with him, you're going to go through me, and I could pull it off. I also do want to encourage you to understand that you should be making judgments about, is this the hill you want to die on? Because not every fight is worth fighting, and not every fight, the cost may be too high, or the issue just isn't worth the time and effort. So don't bother. Make those judgments early on, and don't risk your effort, your emotions, or your career for stuff that just isn't worth it. I might actually get back to technical stuff at some point in this conversation. The other thing I want to tell you about is that there are many different ways to be a leader. I applaud everybody who can serve on boards. I'm on 3 nonprofit boards. I'm on, as you've heard, president of the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, which is a great honor. I'm on the board of National Research Council Board of Energy and Environmental Systems, which I think is a hoot because clearly they did not read my qualifications before they appointed me. They keep referring to everybody on the board as Dr. this and Dr. that, and most of the other members of the board are PhD academics. And I show up, and the distinction that I have is I actually do the work and ask the questions. And everyone else sits around doing email. So the people who actually run the studies and run the board love me because I'm smarter and I work harder and I get more engaged than everyone else on my board. Although that's only because Marilyn Brown left and Maxine Savitz left. So with them gone, it's much less fun and much lonelier. And it would have been way more fun had they stuck around longer, and I'll never forgive you for that. And I'm on the board of the Health Alliance for Austin Musicians, so pick the things that you are passionate about. Again, don't waste your energy on stuff that ain't worth it. I am a leader not because I am in charge of thousands of people, although I had that opportunity and it was kind of fun if you like that ego trip. But someone has to be the person who comes up with powerful ideas, the person who comes up with powerful visions, Not all of those are the people who are at the top of the organization. Some of them are the people standing behind the guy or woman who's at the top of the organization. And some of us have to come up with those ideas and sell them in a powerful, effective way. And so when I talk to you about, in Texas, by the way, we have this saying, the pioneers get the arrows and the settlers get the land. I have always worked on issues and developing ideas before other people throw conferences about them. So that I come up with an idea like standard market design for those small group of you who actually followed the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and market development. A decade ago, standard market design was this idea that there are ways that we should develop principles around competitive markets for electricity. Like there should be competitive markets for electricity, and there should be energy efficiency and demand response, and there should be capacity value recognized and open transmission and so on and so forth. We got totally shot down politically, but if you look around at every major competitive market in the United States and across the world today, most of the principles of standard market design are in effect. I worked on conceptualizing the notion that we developed the first energy efficiency portfolio standard, the first renewable portfolio standard, conceptualizing the idea that we should be regulating and permitting distributed generation as long as its emissions was equivalent to air pollution coming out of coal-fired power plants. This was in Texas. This was a big deal. I've also been the first person to say that net metering is a terrible idea, and that predicted back in 2007 that Hawaii would be desperate to find a different way to pay for this other than net metering. Locational value maps, now that everybody's talking about locational pricing and the value across time and space, I worked on that stuff back when I was at PG&E. So, and now as Tenley knows, I have a really entertaining set of patter about the parallels between the development of the energy industry today and the changes in the music industry. So that's a different conversation that we don't have time for right now. My point broader is, and I do a lot of work in technology adoption, so even though I use my commercial practice to fund all of my nonprofit work, which is fairly extensive. Like I do technology adoption and portfolio reviews for folks like Bonneville Power Administration, a couple different DOE R&D programs, the Hawaii Renewable, whatever Dawn's program is called. So I spend a lot of time working on technology and a lot of time providing advice to people, and a lot of the talent that this requires is being willing to tell the truth even when people don't want to hear it. Which you will be shocked to learn that most of my clients come back for more. I'm always shocked when most of my clients come back for more. But it is important to be true to who you are and what you know you're good at and what other people value. So apparently people value being told the truth. Some people value being told the truth and being abused occasionally but they also value being given good ideas in a way that helps them buy them, in a way that allows them to help develop and own the idea. And that has incredible power and vision, and you should, if that is your skill set, you should value that and leverage it. I should give you a couple of factoids and promises about energy efficiency technology before I sit down, just so that I can say that's probably why she invited me to be up here. C3E, as I hope all of you know, energy efficiency costs less than every single supply-side technology out there. If C3E recently did a study following up on the EPA greenhouse gas rule, if we as a nation adopted an energy efficiency savings target, enacted building codes, built combined heat and power rapidly, and adopted efficiency standards for all key products and equipment, by 2030, we would have CO2 emissions from the power sector down by 26% relative to today. We would have demand 25% lower than today. And this is at a time when, bless you, when energy demand for, well, electricity demand due to a bad economy and to energy efficiency impacts, EIA has been predicting that it would be growing at no more than 0.9% per year. That's before the impact of probable PV and increased energy efficiency. So picture a curve that's going down by 25% instead of essentially staying flat. They predict that we would avoid 600 million tons of CO2, over 925 million kilowatt hours of electricity from any source, and we would avoid the need for almost 500 power plants. We would increase national gross domestic product by 17 billion in 2030 because we can spend all the money we're saving from energy efficiency on things like more jobs and more education and more better food for our kids and all kinds of services and goods that don't involve stuff that goes through a switch or goes up in smoke. And this would increase jobs across all 50 states by over 600,000. That is the kind of world I'd like to live in. And that's one of the reasons that I'm on the board of ACEEE and that I do a lot of work on the side very quietly for organizations that are working on climate change. Regulatory and market barriers continue to inhibit energy efficiency investments. This is one of the reasons that I do the National Academy of Sciences gig. This is one of the reasons that I show up and I lecture BPA about here's how you do demand response better, here's how you do energy efficiency better. One of the reasons that I'm so committed to working in Hawaii, thank you for the privilege of doing that, is to be able to work in the state, to contribute in the place that is really the cutting edge for where all of these issues beat each other up, and to figure out a path and ways to integrate all of these effectively and to make sure that they're all valued and recognized for their contributions. I want to close with the thought that you hear a lot about utility objections to renewables, to high efficiency, to demand response. And a lot of time, the people who are making those objections understandably are frustrated that the mean utility with all the dumb old people who can't get new technology are resisting and fighting us. That's what a lot of them say. And I want to make sure you understand that in my personal experience, every single technology change that utilities are being asked on that we are all working on today, this is hard stuff. It is complicated, it is complex, it is incredibly technically challenging. The reason utilities are resisting is they're the ones who have to keep the lights on. And no one knows how to do this well. And no one knows how to do it technically at the scale and speed that they're being asked to help make all these changes. And the utilities are the ones who ultimately are going to bear the responsibilities if it doesn't work. They're the ones who are going to get blamed, not each one of the 10,000 homeowners in Hawaii who's put a PV unit on their rooftop, not the people who built a wind plant and sent out the wrong software. Sorry, Siemens. But there are a lot of ways that this stuff can go very, very bad. And you need to have patience and help contribute to technical solutions, not just say, now, I want it now, why isn't it done, why are you opposing me? We all have to solve this set of problems together. It is not easy and it is not fast. And you shouldn't just assume that because the other person is opposing you, is opposing your goal, that they are opposing you. What they are opposing is taking a significant technology risk and a significant operating risk. Not all of the obstacles are between other people's brains. Sometimes they're legitimate and we all have to find ways to solve them together. Thank you.
Thank you. They're so awesome. Thank you all so much. Now you all, I'll start thinking of questions because I want most of this time to be spent you all asking questions. So start thinking about it. I was just going to throw one out to get us started here. And I wanted to remember back on a time when I was working on the stimulus bill and getting the $5 billion for smart grid. That was a great lobby day. But I remember there was a really smart senator who wanted to offer an amendment that actually defied the laws of physics, but they thought it was a great idea, and they kept saying to me, but this is a great idea. It's all about load factor. And I was like, yeah, but you don't actually know what that means or what it works. And it's actually the utilities are not going to be able to meet this. It's, I know, it seems like a really good idea. You're using words that are new to you, but you don't know how it works. So thank goodness for people who actually know how things work that can make the right policies. So our mission here is to try to figure out how do we get to this more modern grid, given that we're becoming more urbanized and demand's going down, but how do we move to that? So what do you all think are the big forces for that change? Do you think it's policy? Do you think it's standards? Do you think it's people? Do you think it's mandates? Do you think it's federal? We have this big greenhouse gas mandate from the federal government. Do you think it's overarching federal policy, or is it more localized? I would love to hear how each of you thinks that transition is going to happen. And Anne, I'll start with you since we heard from you first.
That's a big and important question. I like the rest of you. I don't have a lot of confidence in Washington taking on these problems. A lot of what we do would be a ton simpler if we had a price on carbon at the national level, whether by way of a tax or a cap and trade system. So a lot of what we're struggling with could get solved in that way, but I don't think that's going to happen very quickly. So I think a lot needs to happen at the state level. I'm optimistic, actually, that a number of states, Massachusetts among them, Hawaii, New York, Minnesota, are doing quite progressive things. I think it's really important for all of you to talk about what we know, what you know about energy to your non-energy expert friends. I mean, it is amazing how many smart people have no clue. You flip the switch and it's there. They don't know what resources are a problem from a climate perspective. So it's really important to educate the public. So that's for all of you to do. I guess that's my main reaction.
Great. Caroline? Well, I agree with everything Anne just said. I also think it is all the above. It's policy, it's people, it's rules. I don't think, I agree with Anne, that it's not necessarily going to come from DC just because of the politics in DC today. It's much more efficient to do something at the national level. I think the EPA proposal is a start, but it would be more efficient if Congress would just do something, because the Clean Air Act really isn't the right mechanism to go after global climate change. It's just, the Clean Air Act is not meant to go after carbon. So they're sort of shoehorning something together, and that's great, but it's just not as efficient as it would be if you did a cap and trade program or a carbon tax. So the states are where it's happening, and I think that's great too, because the states can be incubators of different policies. They can test new ideas. Every state is different, so really the climate of California is so different than the climates in the East. The size of the state is so different than what we see in the East. And so what's possible in California is not necessarily transferable very easily to the other states, but it can show how certain things can be done and then tweaked for other states. And the same thing for Massachusetts and New York and Minnesota. We're looking at things that are going on in other states and seeing how could it apply to California. And so I do think that states are really great incubators for testing new ideas and new technologies and new ways of doing business. And then I do think people, we look at our workforce and we have a significant number of our current workforce that's retirement eligible today, and going forward just growing over the next 10 years. And so we really are looking for people who have the skills for this new technology, the new economy, the way electricity is going to be delivered in the future, the way that we engage customers in the future will be very different. Our customers span the first adopters to the people who don't embrace technology because it's scary to them. And so we really have to have programs and ways to communicate with those customers, from those who don't want to change anything and just want to flip the switch and have the lights come on, to those who are really interested in being able to control their usage, being able to control their bills through smart devices and smart appliances. And then we also have a very diverse customer base, so a lot of in-language communication because it can't all be in English. And so we do a lot of communication with our customers in their language through organizations that they belong to, because we're trying to get the message out in terms of how they can control their usage, how they can manage their bills, and then the ways that we're trying to help them do that and also work with others in order to help them as well. So it's all those things, I think.
Thanks. And Alicia, you've seen it from both sides, so what do you think?
I think for those of you who are wondering, Alicia Silverstone, Alison Silverstein, I get that all the time because we look so much alike.
Oh, I just called you Alicia. Oh my God.
That's okay. I'm used to it.
I'm so sorry, Alison.
It's nothing that a can of hair dye and 30 years couldn't fix. So electricity is about the flow of three things. It's about the flow of information, money, and energy. And that is enabled, yes, by policy, and yes, by technology, and yes, by people, but there's more than just policy. I have been in the policy world a long time, and I was pretty good at it, and there's a lot of ways for, as you've noted, for policy to be set up that goes spectacularly wrong or is stunningly ineffective because it's unrealistic or it's simply not achievable, or because it's set up by an entity, bless Rhode Island, it's the smallest market in the world, practically, and so Rhode Island can do a lot of policy initiatives that will make almost no difference whatsoever because it's Rhode Island. I'm sorry, Rhode Island. I love you, but, and so the one of the most interesting things, two of the things that I think are driving this the most are technology, because go back to the flow of information, money, and energy. Technology today is really about the flow of information and money. And people are almost peripheral to that, except that it's people who decide what they want flowing. But when you look at the incredible pace of change of technology capabilities, particularly with respect to networking and information and communications technologies, one of the most transformative sets of energy efficiency and energy use domains today is the whole transformation of, people call Internet of Things. I think that's a total bullshit term. And I don't actually want to have GE embedding sensors and control devices in every one of my light bulbs and toasters. And I don't want my refrigerator to be lecturing me about how old the milk is. So, but the fact remains that the whole pace of the ability of change, the rate of change in analytics, in computing, in storage, in the ability to deliver information at incredibly high speeds and bandwidth means that things like every type of automation and control technology you can imagine is being transformed faster than we know how to cope with it. And our ability to extract usable information out of that is transforming too, and policy can't keep up. And one of the things that all that is doing is taking control and choice for a lot of these devices completely out of the hands of policymakers and the people they're capable of beating up on. So that the fact that you can now do a Nest device without having to go through your utility, the fact that you can, that home automation and security and telecom are all being offered by entities that aren't part of your utility and that your regulator can't touch, means that all of these things are being transformed. And oh, by the way, if all that stuff works, it's because people are developing slowly, but effectively interoperability standards
And if stuff doesn't work together, it's because we haven't had time in the standard setting arena to make those standards catch up yet. And bad standards are worse than no standards in some cases. It's really fun working with SoCal Edison in technology space because they're total thugs with respect to technology development. They say, we're big, we're smart, we're a pretty important market, and we're California and first adopters. So we're going to set the specs for this emerging technology first, and you should do it our way. And the vendors all go, oh crap, if I want to sell, I'm going to have to do it in California. And the rest of the industry eventually pays attention and ends up glomming onto the standards that you guys, the specs that you guys set. And so they've done this again and again and again in technology space. Watch them carefully. So I guess it's money and technology that drive what people choose in many cases, more so than policy. Policy is becoming a driver and a limiter, but not always a pole. Sometimes it's more of a straitjacket than it is a destination. I mean, you can use an RPS or an energy efficiency portfolio standard to make people do basics. Building codes and appliance standards, huge and incredibly important. Carbon tax would be fabulous. But we can't wait for all that stuff to happen. It happens really slowly, and again, you know, if it happens in little tiny pockets, it doesn't change the world enough, as much as the world needs to change. So it's all of the above and way more.
Okay, questions. Anybody have any questions? Yes, up front, Tenley.
I have a question for you all about grid resilience. I'm the New Orleans woman at this point in time, and about every 2 years, the wind blows above 35 miles per hour, and we lose power for a week. And we're currently refusing to look at whether perhaps having our lines in the air is a bad idea. We just keep putting them back up there. And it seems actually the more I dig into this industry-wide, it's really not being looked at if we have the right. We're looking at whether we have the right grid technology increasingly now, but it's not being set up or deployed in any sort of way that I can on the ground really push for in my state. So I'm wondering what you all are seeing where you're working.
Yeah, you might want to address this because of Sandy.
Yeah. I used to regulate Entergy, and I can tell you that they are both when I was in Texas and when I was at FERC, and I can tell you that there is very few companies that have underinvested more in infrastructure or managed it more poorly. Hello, is there anyone I haven't pissed off yet this morning? Than Entergy, and it's staggering. They have been very resistant to planning and building. They've been really notorious for under maintenance and underspending, and they have not been new adopters of technology in any way, shape, or form. And yes, every ice storm is a surprise to them. Every high wind is, where did that come from? So that's why I think energy efficiency is a really good policy for, as much weatherization and non-grid options as you can come up with are necessary for self-protection. And it's always been fun watching the city of New Orleans torture Entergy in ways that the state commissioners have never chosen to do, although the state commissioners have gotten a little more muscled in the past few years.
Yeah, so Massachusetts just put out a grid modernization order requiring the utilities to do a whole bunch of things with respect to modernizing the grid. And they have to come back to us pretty soon with a grid modernization plan. And one of the significant pieces of that plan has to do with grid resilience. So there are lots of technological solutions that can make the situation better. I do want to address the point you made about overhead versus underground, which is the literature on that suggests that that is not a magic bullet. When you have underground, I mean, it's more useful in some areas than others. You know, densely populated areas without a high water table, for example, a better idea there than in rural areas. It's very expensive. And once you have an outage, it's harder to find it, so that outages last longer with underground. But absolutely, resilience is key, and our grid modernization order, I think, will have an impact on that. Also, the Massachusetts Supreme Court just upheld our storm order from a couple of years ago, where we heavily penalized a couple of the state's large utilities for not performing the way we believe they should perform with respect to storms. So I think the combination of the Supreme Judicial Courts upholding our storm order and our grid modernization plan and new guidelines we're coming and regs we're coming out with on storms and service quality, I'm pretty optimistic we'll have an effect in that area.
And I don't know if, I don't, so in California, we don't have the kind of storms that you have in the East, which was very surprising to me because I came from the East, so I'm used to hurricanes and storms every year, and we had outages and poles down and wires down. And so fire is a big one for us. If fires come through, sometimes they'll take poles down, and occasionally high winds, but it's just not the same. But the one thing I think that we do have, and more and more states have this, but it's the technology. So at least the smart meters now, we can ping and see exactly much more specifically where the outage is. We don't have to send crews out trying to find it. And then we can often diagnose what the problem is as well. So we can be much more specific and get power back on more quickly. I don't know if the storms will continue to be more ferocious or not as a result of climate change. It does seem that way in the more recent storms. But it is definitely something where I think the technology can at least help companies pinpoint and restore power more quickly. Because it is costly to do undergrounding.
We have time for one more question.
Can I offer one more thought?
Yes.
One of the best ways to teach your home, it's good to have models to point to, and one of the best models with respect to resiliency is the U.S. military. One of the great advantages that Hawaii has had has been that it is so military dominated, and the bases across the sector have been very aggressive at advancing resilience and energy sustainability as a way to further mission accomplishment. More resources for the military mission and security, fewer for care and feeding. And so regrettably, Louisiana has very few military bases. And so you don't have that model for success to point to. But you should find some that you can point to that are doing great work and help bring that back home, because they're really at the leading edge of a lot of resilience and sustainability technology adoption and philosophy. Thank you.
Yeah, that's true. And we have one question here, and I'm afraid that's going to be the last question.
Okay, just a gentle admonishment. I'm off to the World Conference on Sustainable Development, and when you talk about we should fix climate change so I can enjoy the mountains, I think we should fix climate change so that we won't have massive human suffering. And when I go to these international conferences, they turn to me and say, "You're from the United States. Don't you know what's going on? Don't you read the science? I mean, what is happening with you people over there?" And it makes it hard for me to give my keynotes until I answer that. So I know you know that. I know you believe that. But if you could refer to women and children and other people with massive human suffering from climate change, I think that would be a great acknowledgement of the real problem that we face. My question to you, and I want to thank Anne, I think Massachusetts, you laid out an incredible vision with practical steps. That was bravo. My question is, Alec, this idea that solar people should pay more for the grid because somehow they're using it more, which now is going to maybe turn back the affordability of solar, of course we're very concerned about as we see this go on in many states, this struggle. And so I wondered if any of you could address that. Thank you.
Well, I think I mentioned that with California, the AB 327, which was a statute that got passed last year and returned the rate making back to the commission. I don't know that it's paying more for solar. The way that solar today works in California, we have a lot of leasing companies in California, so we have both the leasing and the buying. But for the leasing companies, it is true that a higher rate helps sell the benefits of solar and makes the payback period for the lease shorter. So if you have your rate structure change where that payback period may be longer, it may be more difficult to sell systems. I mean, the marketing may be a little bit more difficult. But I think the payback period is still substantially pretty short in California just because we have higher rates. And I do think that the commission is looking at, right now, the way that the rates are done with the volumetric charges. Yes, we probably need to separate the purchase of the fuel, which solar, customers who have rooftop solar don't need that fuel that we use, that we're purchasing on behalf of our customers to provide the electricity. But they still need the grid to push the electricity that they have excess during the day onto the grid and then take electricity off the grid at night. And so the commission now is grappling with what is the proper way of doing that? How does California best do that where they can still support solar because the sustainable solar industry is also part of the mandate, and yet also make sure that the grid costs are shared across all customers. That's what they're looking at in California.
Ann?
Yeah, so I want to address both points that you made, and thank you for your first point in particular. And I hope that nothing that any of us set up here undermine that point at all. I mean, one of the many real, or one of the most serious dangers associated with climate change is we're going to be seeing huge numbers of climate refugees as water shortages, even greater water shortages occur because of the melting of glaciers in the Indian subcontinent. And I think that's probably the greatest near-term, globally destabilizing risk associated with climate change. Second point about net metering. I think it's obviously a fascinating question that a lot of states are struggling with. What I find interesting, and it might be right. I don't think we know though that those of us, I include myself, who are net metering with solar, ought to be paying some stable amount for use of the grid. But I don't think anybody's been willing to engage in the question of whether those of us who have solar are actually providing more value from the grid than we're taking. So, and I'm not saying I think that's true. I just think we need to ask the question. So when I have raised that question, everybody has jumped down my throat. I can't believe you guys clapped. Because I've heard from the utility side, no, that's ridiculous. And I've heard from the solar developers, basically, no, we think that this system is doing rough justice. And I think the reason we don't explore it is because everybody's afraid they have too much to lose if we were to explore it. The utilities are afraid that we would decide, yeah, solar is actually providing more value to the grid than it's getting paid for. And the solar developers are worried that the opposite conclusion would be reached, which is that we with solar on our roofs aren't paying enough to maintain the grid. But I do think that's a question that deserves to be explored, and I'm always surprised by the unwillingness to do that, although I think I understand the reasons, which I've just articulated why that is.
But it is in part of a matter of thresholds. When you have less than 1% PV, there is a material difference in the impact of that on your system and on its operational capabilities and requirements than when you have 10% PV. And when you have feeders, distribution circuits with over 50% penetration, let me tell you, that's a really different circuit, and it's much harder to serve. And voltage fluctuations and frequency issues. I mean, when solar is cute and tiny, yeah, no cost whatsoever, bring it on. But when solar becomes big, and there is, as in the case of almost, I believe, every Hawaii island, there is more solar in aggregate than any single utility scale generator. This is materially changing the balance and performance of the grid in ways that no one knows how to manage. And Hawaii has spent a fortune rebuilding and redoing the controls on every single one of their central station power plants, and they have hired the best engineering firms in the world to try to help them figure out how to redo the system and to come up with new rules. And you know, these are not trivial issues, and they are not simple to solve, and you can't wave away the issues. The costs are real, and the challenges are real. So states like Massachusetts have time to walk through the math and is this rough justice. States like California, like California is on the borderline. Hawaii is way there in uncharted territory. So where you install your solar has a big impact on how urgent it is to resolve the set of questions. So you can go ahead and applaud if you think solar is not imposing any costs, and your PV panels may not. But don't take it for granted that your experience is uniform and your facts apply everywhere, because they don't.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. First of all, I obviously totally agree with respect to the observations about Hawaii. I don't think we should overlearn the lessons from Hawaii, though, because they're not directly, at this point and for many years to come, they will not be directly applicable to Massachusetts. And please don't misunderstand me to say that I have reached the conclusion that solar homeowners shouldn't be paying something for the use of the grid. I just think we should be asking those questions.
Agreed. Great.
So
I want to thank Alison and Caroline and Ann very much, and thank you for coming and participating and listening, and hopefully you'll have a chance to nab them out in the lobby. So thanks very much, everyone.